At last count, there are 2.4 million podcasts just like mine, each trying to be heard. I'm guessing whatever business you might be in, you aren't alone in it either. And that's where positioning and messaging experts come in. Let's have ourselves a pocket sized pep talk because today's guest is an expert in the field and he's here to help you stand out in a crowd.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jollis.
Today's guest, Brendan Dell, is a positioning and messaging expert to top technology brands with clients including Expedia, ADP, HP, YC, and many others. His book, The 12 Immutable Laws of High Impact Messaging, shares rules for standing out in a crowded market. And that's why I wanted him on the show, because we could all use some help there. Glad to have you with us, Brendan, and welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, let's mix it up. It's a pleasure to have you here. Let's dive on in. And I want to start with your particular niche because it is a little bit unusual.
Sure.
With books and stuff, we don't find them; they tend to find us. How did this topic and this book and space of yours? How did it find you?
Yeah. So I actually started my career in real estate, and I worked for a tenant rep company in LA. And when you're early in real estate, your job is basically to go get business. And so what these folks told me to do was to go cold calling. And to them, that meant walking up and down office buildings on the west side of LA, which really translates into getting thrown out of office buildings on the west side of LA because you're not supposed to walk around those buildings. So I spent like the better part of a year crawling in and out of buildings, getting thrown out and getting nowhere. And that's like the there's got to be a better way moment. And then I stumbled across this book on copywriting, and I set about to figure out, how to do this. I read a bunch of books, and I wrote 2 direct mail pieces, and I sent these things out. They ended up landing, I don't remember the exact number now. It was like $50 or $60 million in business for this team, of which I earned very, very little money, just full disclosure. But I was like, whoa, this works. Like, this is a way, if you can figure out how to message in a way that's different and breaks through the noise, this is a superpower. And so I just, that actually one of the clients that came out of that was a technology company that brought me in and said, how can you help us do something like this? And that set off the whole practice from there.
It's wild. I don't talk about this often, but just how kind of fate steps in. I was a New York Life agent. And by the way, I was the guy doing the same thing you did, only with us, we went in pairs just so you wouldn't run out of the building. You had somebody else you had to kind of lean on each other. But I was actually waiting for management in a Monday morning training class with 22 apprentice field underwriters. The phone rang, and it turned out that management, the manager, the trainer, the senior manager, they had gone out for an early breakfast and they got double parked behind them. They couldn't get out. And so I happened to pick up the phone, and they said, whatever you can do anything. Don't tell them that we're stuck. Just do something in front of the room. So I had learned a sales pitch called the Live, Die, Quit story. And I had some acting experience, and I started teaching it sort of, okay, we're going to do these pieces. Where you're going to punch it, where you're going to pull back, where you're going to pause. And they came in and they went, great job. And they let me finish. And I was smiling because I thought, I know what I'm going to do now. I like this. As a frustrated actor, I like the feel of being in front of this room in a corporate environment and performing. So again, just a random phone call in a sense, but sometimes you think, that's fate. It just sort of steps in.
Yeah, definitely serendipity for sure.
Yeah. I applaud the fact that, you got out there and you banged on doors. I wish companies would understand that there's many ways to prospect, cold calling being one of them. I'm not saying it's terrible, but my dad was a salesman, and he told me one time, he said, cold calling is like shaving. Do a little bit of it each day. And to me, that's somewhat logical to say, let's go out there and just bang our heads into a wall for the next 3 or 4 hours. that's not logical to me, but all right.
Well, I think you got to take stuff in context too, right?
Yeah.
Because these folks were coming out of, okay, when you think about real estate 30 years ago,
Yeah.
there was no Redfin, there was no internet, there was, 30 years ago now. Yeah, there wasn't any of that stuff. And how did you get your information? You had listings come out via paper that you had to go pick up to see what was coming out, or you had to go physically speak to somebody either in person or on the phone, because that was how you were going to reach somebody. So the context for them was they were looking at, and this is part of what messaging does as well, is gets people to think about things differently, is they were taking something that for them was effective and they'd seen it as, this is the way it's always been done, so it must be the way that it should be done. And they didn't realize that actually the world had shifted, right? And like things cannot be done in the same way they were 30 or 40 years ago, because the world looks very, very different.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. Well, I'm dragging you into my sales word. Let's drag you back into your world and talk about messaging. Okay. It was hard enough before COVID, but now, tell me about how companies should position themselves. I mean, and I say this in a positive way, post COVID, or at least managing COVID, whatever we want to call the stage we're in now. What's your recommendation to companies in terms of how they should position themselves?
Sure. So this sort of, it's a big question, but if I'm going to boil it down, I'll say this: what you did is actually just the first part of effective messaging, which is you just position a world that's different, right? You just said to me, it was hard enough to get heard before COVID, and now after COVID, it's 10 times harder. We live in this new world where there's new things that are required to be successful. And if you want to be successful, what are these new things that are required? And so in every industry, all the time, there are big changes that have happened or are happening that are shifting the way in which we need to perceive, or shifting the way in which we need to behave to be successful. And so messaging against those changes is step one. And I'll give you an example to make this clear. So one example of something that I saw a company do recently is there's a company called Grin that's an influencer marketing platform. And what you could do is think of, so that's clear enough, right? Influencer marketing platform. It helps brands connect to influencers in their particular niche. And there's, of course, many of these companies out there. One way that Grin could message is they could say, hey, we're the influencer marketing platform with the most influencers, or we're the easiest to use, right? Or some other benefit like that. Because what you're trying to do ultimately in all of this is be famous for an idea. Positioning is ultimately about, like, what's the recall? What do people know you for? And there's a lot of research that people basically choose the company that they can recall the easiest. But what Grin did is say, no, we have now entered the creator economy. We no longer look to the media, to the news to give us information. We now turn to creators. And if you are going to be successful in this new world, you need to learn how to put an influencer marketing campaign in place. And they've created this imperative and change. And so this is setting them apart from all the other companies out there that are trying to come up with Me Too messaging.
It's interesting to me because you talk about messaging, and trying to stand out. I'm listening to you just going, because I was focusing on COVID, and I'm listening to your answer and listening. I'm going, well, where's the COVID part? And maybe there isn't a COVID part. You know what I mean? I for instance, real fast, but when I just started doing virtual seminars, I would lead with pretty much, and I did, hundreds of them, and I would lead pretty much with the same thing. I'd say, when I'm live, I tend to show up with a jacket on. So I'm wearing my jacket. When I'm live, I typically have a cup of coffee. Look at me, I have coffee. Why do we have to, what's the big change here? Other than the fact, obviously, I'm muting an audience. And so, quite frankly, it didn't work so well, but I worked with a little laugh box I created off an app. And I said, when something funny happens, I'll hit the button. So we'll have that noise too. But in the end, I was trying to make the point, at least deliver, as why does there need to be a difference other than we're physically not there? So I'm pushing back on the question a little bit. of, um, is there a difference, or is it just COVID-19 and we push forward?
So when I say that you bring up the COVID issue, what I mean more is that you identified a change that's
Mhm.
influencing, that's changing people's behaviors, and that is creating a set of stakes and imperatives for companies to understand this new world and to compete well in the new game they need to play. So post COVID-19, we absolutely so. And again, this is just one example of how you might highlight a shift. A very famous example of a brand that did this is a subscription company called Zuora. That's a multi-billion-dollar company that a gentleman by the name of Andy Raskin actually wrote a blog that's very like a viral blog called "The Best Sales Pitch I've Ever Seen." I think it was called, and Zuora leads with, "We now live in a subscription economy." Very different than saying we're the best subscription platform. And comparing themselves against others. They're creating an imperative where they are the only one who can fulfill on this promise. And so if that's not clear, let me know and I can expand. But when I say COVID, what I mean is just you identified a change that makes it imperative for somebody to rethink what they're doing. And that's why that's what you need to do with messaging, is create these stakes where people need to rethink the way in which they're doing the thing that they're doing.
Okay, I got it now. All right. Yeah, no, I didn't get it the first time. I got it the second time. A little slight. I actually came back from Europe about 3 days ago, and I'm
Very
a little
nice.
foggy. But work with me, Brandon. Work with me.
I'm working with you. Yeah, we're working on it together.
Okay. Uh, all right. Well, to me, one of the scariest things in business, have you ever heard the 4 levels of conscious behavior, where you can be unconsciously incompetent, consciously competent, unconsciously competent? It's the 4 ways that
I
we can
haven't.
kind of mentally live in a sense. And
Okay,
for me, of course, one of the scariest parts is being an unconscious incompetent, because you don't know what you don't know.
sure.
So how does a company, um, that may very well be unconsciously incompetent, in other words, they don't know that they don't know, how do they determine when their positioning is off? I'm 30 years in business. That nobody came up with a sign that said my positioning's off. How do we determine that?
So when you're having conversations with customers, do they come with you with a clear understanding of what it is you do and why you're different? Are you constantly getting into price conversations about, can you do the same thing for less? When you pitch to them, do they not have clarity around what you do? Those are all signs that you do not have effective positioning. Ultimately, what you're trying to do, it's Lyft versus Uber. You're trying to contextualize value and create a relationship with people so that they believe you are the only one suited to serve their problems, right? And so if you're getting commoditized, your positioning is not as effective as it could be.
Huh, that's a very simple answer. No, it's true. I think, unfortunately, many companies don't know what strengths to draw companies to. They're not clear on their own messaging, and I say that in terms of, I wrote a piece once called, forgot the exact title, was basically dealing with the sea of sameness.
Yeah.
Even,
Mm-hmm.
Brandon, you have a podcast. I have a podcast, and like
Mm-hmm.
I said, there's 2.4 million other knuckleheads with podcasts, and so
Yep.
in a sense, we're in a sea of sameness, and yet,
Mm-hmm.
uh, we're looking to do things that are a little bit different. That's,
So
you know, so, but that's the challenge. For a lot of companies, we don't know when our position, when our marketing is off. But I liked your response, because you're absolutely right. The sales guy in me says, when I get hit on price, well, it's just a lack of urgency. Um, but maybe I'm getting hit on price because I'm in a sea of sameness, and
price is a function of value, right? And
right.
so if people believe you're uniquely qualified to solve a problem, and this is the real world. It's not that you never, even Tony Robbins discounts his tickets, right? But what you will do is you will find I'll use another example from the B2B software space where I operate. There's a company called Gong that does call recording. And they pioneered basically what they do is they allow you as a sales leader to understand what separates your high performers from your low performers. You understand how much an individual rep is talking, what kind of language they're using when they bring up price, and you can coach your reps up based on this call intelligence. Now, if you're in that space, most people simply believe that Gong is the category leader there. When they come into Gong, they know what they're getting. They don't compare them against alternatives, and they generally simply want to purchase Gong, even though there's a bunch of other people that do this. You want to be the person that people come inbound to already believing they need you. There's a thing that's well documented in psychology called anchoring bias. And it basically says that once somebody has changed their mind, once somebody has arrived at a conclusion, that even in the face of overwhelming evidence, conflicting evidence, people will not change their minds. And we can see this all over the place in our society, right? With politics and whatever. So if somebody has, through the process of educating themselves about possible solutions, created a mental position or framework for themselves that you are the person who can solve their problem, price will not matter. All of these other, factors will not matter because they've already made that decision for themselves. And even when presented with overwhelming evidence to the contrary, it's very difficult to change their mind. So that's why you're in sales, you're well aware of all the stats that say, how the first company to help a customer is most likely to win that customer and all those sorts of things, right? All that enters into it.
Yeah. Well, not only am I in sales, but I actually wrote a book called How to Change Minds. So
there you go.
I'm on top of that topic. And and it's really interesting when you get into the political part of this, because I was asked by my publisher once, this was when the first Trump election, and could you write an article about that? And it was challenging. How do you change somebody's political mind? Because as you say, they're just so dug in. But I offer this back to you, and truly, I'm not an expert on changing political minds. But the one thing that I did come up with, and I don't necessarily apply this to business as much as to some of these other areas like this, is okay. You want to sit down and change somebody's mind and their politics. One rule, and that is you have to sit down and be willing to have your mind changed. And that's unfortunately where the problem lies. I come in, I go, all right, I'm going to change Brandon's mind, but I have no intention of changing my mind. I'm going to steamroll your mind. And no wonder we're just battling each other. But if you and I sat down and let's make ourselves rational for a moment and really went in with the condition of I'm not only going to listen to you, I am willing to have my mind changed. Put me on a lie detector. The needles aren't moving. I am telling you the truth. We could get somewhere, but it's unfortunately that's a tough position right now to be in.
Yeah. When you just identified another important consideration for people who are trying to sort of contextualize how to message for themselves and why this is so important. And that is that human beings are not particularly rational in general. They are overwhelmingly emotional creatures, and the most effective messaging is going to appeal to people on an emotional level. It is not going to appeal to people on an irrational level. And this is, B2B is the space that I overwhelmingly work in. And this is a conversation that you have many times where people will say, well, this is B2B. It's different. We have to appeal to people on a rational level on how they're going to improve their jobs. There was some folks named, it was the last name were Les and Benet, I believe. And they did a study called The Long and the Short of It. And it was what makes people buy. They did a consumer study and they did a business study. And which advertising is most effective? Overwhelmingly in both categories, emotional advertising produced higher outcomes than rational advertising. So even though we like to think of ourselves as rational, we generally are not.
That's interesting. Because if you study Myers-Briggs and DISC and, all the personality models, what you're saying makes sense. Because first, while you were saying, I was like, oh, yeah, well, what about analytical people? But then I thought, well, oh, yeah, but what percentage of people are analytical. It's a percentage. It's not an overwhelming percentage. It's they're out there.
Yeah.
I don't see a whole lot of them, but they're out there.
Well,
Yeah.
this is an example of, so there are analytical people, but even those people tend to anchor to their own biases. And you can see this in the medical profession a lot, where if somebody believes like in a particular modality of treatment, for example, and then research comes out that has conflicting evidence that says actually it's a different way, you'll see big pushback in the medical community that says, oh no, this study must be wrong. Right? They indict the study. And there's of course differences in study design, but you will see this across. There's a really good class called Your Irrational Mind, which is by a Harvard professor named Steven Novella. And he walks through this in great detail, all of the ways in which we trick ourselves into thinking that we are rational people and are overwhelmingly not.
Right. And you're working on some courses. Is this covered in your course?
Yeah, actually we do in my course, $1 Billion Pitch, that if folks are interested, they can find it on my website, brendandell.com. But we talk a lot about this, and the course walks through the not only essentially one, how and why do people buy things, and then two, what are the elements which are relatively predictable to create a pitch that's going to be compelling to people and get them to do the thing that you want them to do, spend some money.
Right. So you got the course, you got the podcast, you got the book.
Yeah.
You are very clearly messaged. Just you got to walk the walk, I guess. Okay.
Yeah.
In selling, and I get this asked of me a lot, like, well, what's the most important thing that you've learned, and as a salesman, as a sales trainer, and it's very elementary, and yet it's just pervasive. But people don't naturally, instinctively ask questions and listen. There isn't a person I've met who hasn't heard that that's a pretty good idea. People think they're doing it, but they're not really doing it. And I, for years I brought out tape recorders, and then I brought out micro cassette recorders, and now I have apps I have people load up. But I don't. I actually have them go ahead and have conversations, and you just track it. It's proven. What about your profession? What are a couple things that are, instinctive, let's say, but not logical, that we're just off on?
That we're just off on. Okay. Well, that we're just off on. Yeah. So one of the things that companies are often compelled to do is look for cuteness, to be different, or to look for cleverness. And clarity is often a much better strategy, almost overwhelming, just clearly stating what who you're for, the problem you solve, and how you help is going to be more effective than trying to be cute or clever. A second piece of this is people, often overly kindly, in kickoff meetings with teams, they'll be like, okay, this is Brendan, and he's a messaging genius for the following reasons. And the reality is that as much as that feels good, it's just not the case. What you pointed to, great messaging is great listening. It's going to customers, it's asking the right questions, it's listening to what they say, and it's using their own words to craft the messaging. It's not about some mystical art or some creative stroke of genius that results in some, actually a lot of the campaigns that people know, like the Yo Quiero Taco Bell campaign, that everybody's familiar with, that guy got fired. That campaign didn't do anything. It was totally ineffective. The CMO who ran that was fired on the back of that whole thing. And so it's memorability is not what you need. It's fame around the ability to solve a problem. And yeah. So those are the two.
Okay, good. All right. 2 for me, 2 for you. But I tell you, we cross paths a bunch of times, and one of them that you hit on, which I'm smiling, was how many times I have to tell my clients, I don't break it down to cuteness or anything like that, but from a sales perspective, because we study decision cycles and we study decision points. So, we are studying the prospect and the customer before we just go slamming in sales ideas. And one thing that we see just kind of coming back at you, and like I said, I think this is where we crisscross is, the fact that companies always seem to want to trumpet the benefits of their solution, which people don't connect with nearly as much as identifying with the problems that they're living with, that
Mhm.
solution may just well take care of. But it's the problem that we identify with, not really the solution. And just real fast, but I didn't get the job, by the way, but I was years ago interviewed. I was still working for Xerox, interviewed by a brand. It was a very new company um, that was selling products on television, and that was kind of a new thing. It was, and they wanted me to work with their on-air talent, and they just wanted to. Every time they wanted me when they got phone calls to ask people, well, what are you getting the saw for, and and then how many do you want, and how pretty is the saw, and I was kept saying no. I want to know what they're using right now that isn't working. How dangerous that 25-year-old electric saw is that got passed down in the family, and and they just couldn't make that connection. I actually lost the client. I'm
Mm.
not exactly naming the client, but I think you can figure out who it is. But I still sit back and smile and go, I had it right. I just unfortunately couldn't get them to believe. But
Mm.
I think the good websites, maybe, and you're the expert. But to me, again, the good websites are giving you a picture of the problem that you can associate with, not necessarily the solution. Am I on base on this one?
So an unsatisfactory answer is I think it depends. I think it depends who you're speaking with in the context of what you're messaging to.
Okay. All right. All right. You don't have to agree with everything. How dare you? How dare you? Thought that was a layup, but no. That's why we get a guest like Brendan in here. He's telling it like it is. Okay. Coming down the hot the home. Oh, where's our time going? Let's move you on. No, I'm thoroughly, by the way, thoroughly enjoying this conversation because I am off base and I'm learning a bunch from you. And I frequently can kind of nudge in my world with sales and say, yeah, I got it. But you're coming from a different angle, and it is a little bit new for me. So we were talking about a down market. How how does your how does your strategy change in a down market? If we're going to position ourselves properly, um,
Mhm.
how does that change?
So to your point around pain and problem, I think it's an understanding of the reality that your particular upstream of all of this is your customer, right? You need to
Right.
have clarity around who you're going after, why you're going after them, and how you're uniquely in a position to help them solve a problem. And the problems that those people are facing are going to change in a market like this. So your message needs to change with that problem. And that's really what it comes down to, is understanding what that change is for them and messaging to them appropriately. People will you see people moving to figure out how to do more with less. You see people you could rattle off all the different ways in which this is affecting people, but that's the most imp- upstream part of it all.
Okay. So I haven't exactly been batting 1,000 with you, but if I play it back and say that um, we, one size doesn't fit all, and we have to be willing to change and conform, to as I say, sort of play the ball where it lies in golf, um,
Mm,
and not just get stuck in our ways, but be willing to be flexible in a down market. Do I have that right,
I
Brandon?
agree. Yeah, of course, I agree.
Folks, you can't see. I'm sweating. I'm sweating hard with this guy. Uh,
No
uh,
sweating. No need for sweat. No sweating.
Get a little sweat out of me. That very rarely happens. I think I may not be feeling well, but no, you got some sweat coming out of me today.
I'm not intentionally. I apologize if that's the case.
Hey, you want to know something? And you're a podcast host. I think the greatest gift a guest can give is get the host to sweat a little bit. I sometimes
Yeah,
get frustrated when everybody agrees with me. Well,
yeah.
you're agreeing with some, and you're nudging some other stuff, and I appreciate it.
What do we have if we don't have constructive dialogue, right? That's how we
Bingo,
all push forward.
bingo,
Yeah.
bingo. Yeah, yeah. All right. I got like a question and a half left for you, but
All right.
I'm looking at you. I'm just reading up on you, and you write about high impact positioning stories. All right. First of all, tell the audience what that is, and then tell me why that's important.
Yeah. So again, positioning is fundamentally answering the question, what are you going to be famous for? What are you going to be known for? And to go back to that same study by Les and Benet, it's two gentlemen. When they looked at what was most indicative of a brand's success, their ability, it was fame. How famous were they as the leader of a given category? And this is true in B2B and it's true in B2C. And so what you're trying to do with positioning is say, how am I going to be famous? And not famous in a broad sense, like Brad Pitt famous or whatever the cultural reference point is now, but famous to the people that matter to you. You know, like if for me, right, I work with tech brands. So how am I famous to tech brands? What do they know me for? And that's what you're answering with positioning is, yeah, that question.
Good. All right. Last question for you. Mentors. I don't always ask this question, but I'm always surprised at the answers that I get. So is there a mentor or two that stands out for you? Because you do have a very unique niche, and we got your story of how you got in, but is there a mentor or two that shaped this a little bit for you?
Man, I don't have a great answer to this question, honestly.
Yeah, you sweat a little bit.
There,
How do you like it? Welcome to the party.
I think, honestly, most of my mentors, that maybe this is a sad answer if it's anything, but most of my mentors have come. I'm trying to think of people in person. Actually, one of the clients I'm working with right now is a gal named, and I wouldn't call her a mentor, but her name is Rose, and she's the founder of this company called Sudozi. And she was a CFO at Uber and a variety of, she's got a very impressive background. She went to MIT, very, very bright. Anyway, I feel like I'm learning a ton from her and getting pushed in new ways. So I think that's been really gratifying. But then in terms of mentors, I think I've learned just so much from different books and things like that over time. I think that's some of the biggest sources of mentorship. I'm doing, air quotes here, that I can think of.
All right. Well, I want to keep the heat on you. So other than
Great.
the 12 immutable laws of high impact messaging, which everybody's going to go buy and write a review on now.
Yes.
Give me a book title.
Man, I could give you tons. I think one of the first books that I read that I thought was really interesting is a 100-year-old book by a guy named Claude Hopkins called Scientific Advertising, which is, it's just, it's 100 years old, but the principles of it are still relevant. And it teaches you a lot about how you should think about marketing and advertising and psychology and these sorts of things. Another one that I found really illuminating is Sapiens, which is a more recent book about how people essentially evolved. And it helps you to contextualize how and why people construct meaning and why society looks the way that it does. And it helps you think about then what you're trying to, all of marketing is trying to create change, right? Somebody's already doing something and you're trying to get, sales is the same, right? And you're trying to get them to do something else to make their life better, but you have to overcome this trust gap to get them to get there. And it helps you to understand how people construct meaning and get you thinking about then how you can influence that meaning for what you're doing.
Excellent. Good. I appreciate that. All right. Where can listeners find and learn more about you?
Yeah. So the podcast is $1 Billion Tech. You can find that on iTunes, on YouTube, on all the good, we're newly on YouTube, so you can now find it there. Spotify, etc. My website is brendandell.com, where you can sign up for the newsletter to get those podcasts directly. And then the book, 12 Mutable Laws, is Amazon, everywhere books are sold.
Perfect. And because that name Brendan can be spelled a few different ways, that's BRENDANDELL, Brendan Dell, one word.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
No worries. Yeah. Well, listen, I've enjoyed it. I need to take a shower, but I've enjoyed it.
I hope not. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
No, you got to get to know me. Once I get my teeth into something, I don't let it go. So don't worry about it. Well, listen, I appreciate you being on the show. I really, I have to tell you, I'm surprised at how much I learned from you because I thought coming into
That's
this,
kind.
well, I've got a pretty good fix on this, and now my instincts were off in a bunch of different areas, and that's why I like getting guests like you on the show. That's what it's about, podcaster to podcaster. So I'm grateful
Totally.
and really think you did a great job. Really grateful you were on the show.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, everyone. Until then, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.